We in the Charitable Society have not shied away from the fact that in the 18th and 19th century, some members of this society benefited from the slave trade. And some members of the society were part of the abolitionist movement. And this match must have been evident in many societies. It was evident in this society. And we share this information in our talks and tours. And we try to encourage those who are involved to think about how some of those who were dedicated to helping the poor in Belfast were clearly less charitable to suffering that occurred elsewhere.
Last year, 2020, will be remembered above all for the Black Lives Matter protests after the murder of George Floyd. And one of the questions that I think future British historians will ask when they look back at this global anti-racist movement that fueled the events of 2020 is why, when that storm of protest made landfall in the United Kingdom, was so much of its energies spent not on contemporary and present-day racism and racial inequality in the campaign to end them, but on history, on the stories of slavery, empire, and migration. Historians found themselves on the front lines of these debates as the reputations of great men from past centuries were called into question. Statues fell, others were taken into protective custody. The targets of that remarkable moment were very often slave owners and slave traders from the 17th or the 18th centuries. With the realities of slavery and the slave trade brushed to the margins, the former sugar barons and tobacco lords could be remembered merely as members of the elite, and new money became old money as the sources of their wealth were forgotten. What was remembered, however, was their philanthropy, because it is true, undeniably true, that some of the men who traded in human flesh, who sold men, women, and children, who grew rich from the trade in the commodities produced by enslaved people, invested some of their wealth in philanthropy and charity. The great challenge facing us in the 21st century is to see how it was that men who did terrible things did and could sometimes use their money to do good. How do we make sense of all this? How do we think about schools, almshouses, charities, poor houses, and the generations of people who benefited enormously from such institutions in the light of our growing knowledge about the men who funded them and the activities that made them rich? Escaping from the tacit compact that abolition justifies historical silence is not easy. It demands that we confront painful realities as well as these bewildering contradictions. The strong urge to focus on emancipation rather than slavery, upon abolitionists rather than the defenders of slavery. That tendency explains why we in this country know the name of the abolitionists, William Wilberforce and Tom Clarkson, but few of us can name the men who led the West India Lobby, the most powerful, influential political lobbying group in our history, the men who defended the slave trade and the right of British subjects to hold what they called property in men. And one of the challenges facing us in 2021 is how do we liberate the historical lives and reputations of the abolitionists from the function to which they've been put for so many decades, to be used as a distraction, to prevent a deeper engagement with the reality of slavery and the slave trade. For too long, there was a willingness to remember abolitionists while forgetting who and what they fought against. How do we celebrate them and their stories in new ways and not allow them anymore to be deployed as a distraction? We do a disservice to the enslaved if we remember abolition, not slavery. We do a disservice to the abolitionists if we fail to understand the complexities of their struggle and the scale of the opposition they faced. If we forget that they were not lauded and celebrated at the time, but often ridiculed as fanatics, particularly female abolitionists like Mary. Difficult though it is, we must resist the urge to see their struggles through 21st century eyes. We have to expect and accept contradictions and complexities, every bit as bewildering as that of the idea of the slave trader philanthropist. Each of us are aware that the minerals that are critical to the operating of the phones in our pockets or on our desks are scraped from the earth by the hands of impoverished Africans. Very many of them children, all of them working on conditions that no child should ever be forced to endure. Conditions that Mary Ann would recognize from her readings of American slavery. All of us in the 21st century are likewise aware that the clothes in the shops that we frequent are in some cases produced in sweatshops by poor people, most of them women, working in hours that are injurious to health, in buildings that in too many cases are unsafe, as we have seen in Bangladesh and elsewhere. It's understandable. This is difficult. And very often we want to trumpet the things that we can be proud of. And it's very, very difficult to confront histories that are painful as well as celebratory. But juxtaposing both to show that members and benefactors were on both sides and that the story is connected to both sides, I think this is the direction that we need to travel in. We need to think that history is not only there to make ourselves feel good, it's there to make us think. And in some ways, the bewildering complexities and contradictions of slavery and enslavement and our roles in it, I think is a perfect mental exercise in making us understand that history is not merely a collection of comforting stories. It's challenging, and it should be challenging.